legislative subcommittee meeting of the Ethics Commission to order. First, we'll do roll. Chair Walling here, Vice Chair Dufferin,
Present.
and Commissioner Oscarson.
Here.
Right? And staff, we have Commission Counsel Chase here, Executive Director Armstrong,
Here.
Executive Assistant Pedroza here, and Senior Legal Researcher Darcy Hayden.
Here.
And that's it, right? Yes.
Yes, Madam Chair, that's all staff that's attending today.
All right, this time we will do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Executive Director Armstrong, do we have any members of the public?
We do not have any members of the public present, and we received no written public comment.
Yeah. And do we have any members of the public on Zoom?
We do not have any members of the public on Zoom.
Right, now we will move to item number 3, approval of the minutes from our April 20th, 22 legislative subcommittee meeting. I'd like to ask my subcommittee members if there are any corrections or additions to the minutes.
I had no corrections or additions.
Okay. Seeing none, I will ask for a motion to approve the minutes as read.
I'll make that motion.
Is there a second?
Yes, ma'am.
Right, all those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, motion carried. Next item, item 4, discussion and approval of the updated legislative proposal for the 82nd legislative session 2023 to amend NRS Chapter 281A, Nevada's Ethics in Government Law, for submission to the full commission for consideration and approval at its May meeting. At this time, I would like to ask our executive director for a presentation.
Thank you, Chair. This is Executive Director Armstrong. In the packet, under agenda item 3, you'll find a mocked up bill. Don't worry about the formatting and stuff. That will be cleared up. I think it makes sense today to walk through some of the remaining issues from the prior one. So the attachment has deleted all of the things that you indicated you wanted deleted at the last meeting. And then there's a couple more items for conversation. So as we walk through, and I'll note that in the bill, so they're highlighted items or items for real discussion today. There's also green items, and those items in green were items that the Commission Council and myself found as we were going through just some cleanup items. So the first one is on page 2 of the bill, section 4, was just a little bit of technical cleanup from the Commission Council in terms of defining what a party is. And then on page 3 of the bill is our kind of first highlighted discussion. So there's also a handout that talks about proposed language. And so this would be our first point of discussion today, is section 10. In the last bill was really the section discussing a new ethics standard for the state of Nevada that would be about really those bad actors that we're talking about, that is not so much benefiting oneself, but using your government position to harm someone else that's still within our jurisdiction. So we're not talking about, harassment or HR issues, but bad actors. And so on the handout that talks about proposed statutory language, you'll see the language from the original AB 65 and then 2 potential alternatives for a new bill. The first one eliminates, so I'll just say from my perspective in reading section 10 from last time, it was hard to determine what it meant because it talked about doing something in a gross or unconscionable abuse of your official position that would then have a reasonable person like deviate from their duties, which kind of follows some of the language we have currently in our bill. But for me, it was really hard to read it and say, what would this be? And I think we had that discussion last time. Even the example that was brought up, like someone improperly refusing to issue somebody their fishing license out of animus, I didn't think the language in the last bill actually would cover that. And so alternative 1 gets rid of that impartiality part and the integrity part and just focuses on a gross or unconscionable abuse of official power, and then would establish some factors for the commission to consider. And so those included personal animus and the ability of the affected individual to appeal or take other reasonable action to remedy the harm. And then if there's a discussion of what other factors might help with that one, that's in there. And then the alternative 2 kind of takes our unwarranted benefits language and flips it to unwarranted harm motivated by pecuniary interest or personal interest. So those are kind of the 2 alternatives that we've come up with since the last meeting that the commission may want to consider. So the options would be to not go forward on this type of provision, to use the same language as last time, or to pursue one of the alternatives. The process, we don't have to get the exact language for today, but it would just be direction for us as we have that back and forth with the LCB during the bill drafting process. We would know kind of which direction to send LCB in the drafting.
Okay. All right, I'll open it up for comments, questions from my fellow commissioners. And which one alternative are you looking at that you prefer?
Why are you all looking at me? I can even feel you looking at me on camera. Is it my new headphones? Is it my surroundings? Are you staring at the artwork behind me? What is it?
The artwork.
Madam Chair, if I might have a moment, I think there's been a tremendous amount of work done on this, and I much prefer the alternative that Mr. Armstrong and staff have come up with. I think
Which
there needs to
one?
be something there. The one he just discussed.
1 or 2?
Well, 1 stays the same, right?
No. Yeah, it's Executive Director Armstrong, if you would like to.
Yeah, so in the packet, the handout, the first option is to keep the language the same. Alternative 1 kind of gets rid of the weird impartiality, integrity language, and then would add factors for the commission to consider in determining if something is a gross or unconscionable abuse of power. Alternative 2 talks about unwarranted harm, motivated by pecuniary or personal interest.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
if I can interrupt
please.
Commissioner Oscarson's thought process, and if you're
Please,
okay with that.
thank
you. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Yeah, so in reading through the 3 alternatives, the first one being keeping the existing language from our prior bill versus number 1 and number 2. I too feel that we need something. I still don't like, I definitely don't like 1, the original, and I don't like alternative 1. And alternative 2 would be my choice. However, there's still some words in here that leave a lot to be desired. For example, the executive director mentioned unwarranted harm. So how do you define unwarranted? And I know we've had a lot of cases in the past, which is why we're having this discussion today about, and I'm not going to bring any specific examples, but the whole purpose of having this language in our bill is to be able to capture things that we know are unethical, and where we have an abuse of power by a public person or an official. But we just can't really wrap our hands around it. We don't really know how to define it, and I'm still not sure alternative 2 does that. I mean, it comes super close. So I think I'd like to see maybe some more language. And I wish I could give you that language, because I still don't. I read through these a lot, and alternative 2, I was trying to come up with more language, but every time you drill down into the language, you also carve out examples. So the broader it is, the better it is, but also the broader it is, sometimes you catch things you don't want to in your net. So, and I know that when we have these issues, we have 8 commissioners that will look at these, and they'll all have their own opinion. And that's why we have 8 commissioners. But I still think if we're going to go forward, I felt 2 was the best one. And I felt that staff would need to continue to work on it. And once again, my specific concerns would be just the unwarranted. So the term unwarranted. So how do you define what's warranted and unwarranted? And it's kind of like, It's kind of like when you see it, you know it. When you see it, you know it, but not everybody would agree to that. And then also we have a significant, the term significant pecuniary. So what's significant? How do we determine what is significant versus insignificant? And maybe there's some language already in our, and I see the general counsel holding your hand up. So commission counsel, please interject.
Yeah, on the term significant pecuniary interest, that's pretty prevalent already in the ethics law. And it's already defined in some of your opinions as well. And it just means something that's not de minimis.
Okay.
So it could be anything that's basically determined by money.
Okay.
Rather than some interest that is not related to money or funds or profit in that regard. So that one I'm less concerned about. I do agree with you on the unwarranted harm. And I wanted to just point out, because the executive director mentioned it to me, that he has already done a search across the country to find some similar language that might help us. And that was not fruitful. And I had done that previously. This would really be possibly a challenge for LCB, but
Sure.
they're up to the challenge of trying to find the language, definitely. But if we could get the thoughts down on what we're trying to capture, that will help us with the direction on the language.
Yeah, another term in alternative two that I struggled with was just the two words other interests. Okay, so how do we define what other interests would be? Or it says a pecuniary or personal or other interests. Okay, so that's kind of pretty broad. And I know once again we've been doing this for a while, so when we see it, we know it. But LCB doesn't see this; they don't know what we're talking about. And this, I think, hurt us in our last bill where they felt we were broadening our powers. And this definitely does broaden our powers in a sense. It does capture behavior that I feel we should capture because it goes to the ethics. It goes to the entire chapter. Once again, though, those are my thoughts. Those are my concerns about specific terms. And just if we could. There's that fine line between dialing it down and getting the right term where it's not, throwing a huge broad net and capturing things that we really didn't intend to capture in that type of behavior. Those are my thoughts. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, I agree. Yes, Commissioner Oscar.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry, do you want to go ahead or do you want me to?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I concur with the vice chair's complete train of thought. I believe that this is going to have to be as concise as we can make it. The good news is it doesn't have to be perfect right now. We can continue to dial it in and do what we need to do. And there'll be some input from LCB too, as to how maybe it's been worded in other places. They can pull from other commissions and let boards and things that they have that similar language across the country. So I think they're a great resource for us. I think staff has done a great job with what our requests were. And I think we just go forward with what we have and continue to dial it in. I completely agree with the vice chair's assessment.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Listening to Commissioner Oscarson, it prompted me going forward to help staff in crafting this language. So if we could have specific examples where this unwarranted harm or this type of behavior where an individual was basically where we would capture the types of behavior that this new statute would capture, or that this new piece of our statute would capture. Because I know, once again, not giving examples, I think, is hurtful towards getting this passed. If we would give specific examples on cases that we had where we said, if we had this piece of legislation, then we could capture this type of behavior, and then we would be able to move forward. So once again, we don't really have any specific examples. I mean, I can come up with a couple, and we talked about the fishing license, but those are the types of things I think would be helpful in having a more broad discussion, maybe with the entire commission or even just with LCB about what are you trying to do here? What specific behaviors are you trying to capture? So I think that would be helpful in the long run. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you. I agree with both of my fellow commissioners that I prefer alternative 2 than to alternative 1. And I definitely don't like what they had before because, as you said, what does it mean?
Right.
You know, and one thing we have to be careful of and cognizant of is when we go forward with them, that we keep the language simple enough that it doesn't get to where it's back to number 1, or, the original. And I think that if we use some examples, and we do have some, because I can remember cases where it's like, well, we don't have that because it wasn't a pecuniary interest, but it was an abuse of power because they didn't like this person, they went and granted them licenses, okay? So I think we should have those examples, examples of, okay, somebody goes and makes their chief of staff, they call them up and say, hey, you have to go to Easter services with me on this Sunday. Well, it's kind of abusive, I think, So I think the unwarranted language kind of, I struggle with that part of it. Okay, I don't have a problem with the significant, just because, as Commission Counsel said, it's in a lot of our ethics provisions and stuff. So I guess I would just direct staff to continue to massage this a little bit, maybe dig out some examples, and maybe that might help come up with better wording or something. And I think with LCD, we need to go and show them the examples so they can understand what it is we're trying to do instead of just take it and run with it.
Yeah, I think the examples will be helpful in working with them on the
Mhm.
capturing the right language.
Yeah.
Madam Chair, from what I'm hearing, really the examples that we're focusing on, because a pecuniary interest example, to me, that's pretty much a
Yeah.
given.
Mhm.
Excuse me, we're looking at more like a personal interest. What constitutes a personal interest examples? And we could bring up some of those, so we can work on that and refine that language in that way.
Okay. Okay.
And we can see there's a provision about unwarranted benefits where they define unwarranted, and we can make sure that definition works in this context too.
Okay.
Because that may be helpful.
All right.
Madam Chair, just thinking out loud, like a personal interest would be maybe your employer, your boss tells you, will you please go pick up my dry cleaning, or will you please go pick up my dog from dog daycare, or will you please go pick up my kids from daycare? Those are the types of personal interests that people may think that we're talking about.
Well, but that would be a misuse of government property because you're asking an employee to do personal business, right?
Yeah, it's the employee's time and resources, so we do fit that into that statute as well. The other personal interest would be, I really just don't like this person for whatever reason. And that's where I think this commission, we have not taken on cases in the past that was based on just that personal malice against somebody, that really public service should be higher than that. It should be based upon what you have to do in your public position, not what you personally feel against somebody. And I don't know if I've seen any cases against the country, but we'll look for that as well when I'm looking through.
Yeah, and that goes to the abuse of power. But it's, once again, as we're just having this discussion right now, we're kind of drilling down in specific examples. And that's, I think, once again, that's what the legislature does when they hear bills. They want examples about what we're talking about. And I think, once again, as we have these discussions, whether it be internal or external, we need to give them specific concrete examples about what we're referring to and what we're not referring to. So that would be my closing remarks.
And I want to add to your remarks, the examples that you provided, I think, are valid. Because just because it fits under one statute doesn't mean it won't fit under another. So we could include those as part as well.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay. All right. I think you guys have some direction.
We do. The next the next area where there's some just green clarifying changes is on page 5. We'll see in section 17, just making it broad so that it's clear that the complaint applies to anything in the chapter. rather than referring to just statutory ethical standards. So it's this particular chapter. And then in section 20, you'll see there's clarification that at the first meeting of the fiscal year and annually thereafter, we'll elect a chair and vice chair. We might be able to actually get rid of and annually thereafter. But I'm sure this language is left over from the very first time the commission existed. And so just getting it, we've been operating now for some time. And so getting that language cleared up, that just makes it clear it's that first meeting of the fiscal year.
I'm sorry, what page are you on?
I'm sorry, that's
Page
page 5, section 20.
So are
it's
you in
Page
that?
number 5 at the.
Gotcha,
on the
I
bill.
see it. And so are you suggesting on that one change that once a chair or vice chair is elected, we don't need to do it again until?
No, he's just saying that we do it at the first meeting of our fiscal year, because right
You're
now it
just
says
changing it to a fiscal year.
because right now it says at its first meeting
Right.
and annually.
I see what you're saying. Okay, thank you.
The next part is on page 7 of the bill, section 21A. Commission Council made some changes there just to make sure that when we're talking about those having a mediation or settlement conference, that it's after the panel has made a determination. It's not before that. And then we have a while before the next change. So the next one is on page 17, and this was one at the last meeting. There was some indication that the language was a little bit confusing, and so there's an elimination of the bona fide relationship that protects the confidentiality and just really focuses on it's based on confidentiality under the terms of a contract or as a matter of law. So I think that's just more crystal clear for folks, the type of items they would not have to disclose. And then on page 23, section 38, sure that this was Commission Council noticed that in the advisory opinion language, there was some a typo or mistakes that would create, you have to have a public meeting for all of the advisory opinions. And so this language cleans that up and says you only have to have a public meeting if a person requests it.
Did we lose Commissioner Oscarson? Oh,
back.
He just turned his
No,
video
ma'am,
off.
I'm here. No, ma'am, I'm here. My video is in and out. I apologize.
oh, all right. Okay, thank you.
So that's a fix for the typo in the last
Okay.
bill. Section 40 you'll see is eliminated. We didn't discuss this last time because it was tagged as a miscellaneous cleanup language, but it's not needed since we've gotten rid of the informal advisory process. So we just want to make sure it gets deleted out of the next bill. And then section 41 is the first one that talks about the time extensions. I think you remember from last session was a hot topic. And so on the same handout that talked about the alternatives for the unwarranted harm piece, on the second page of that handout are some alternatives to deal with time extensions. So time extensions are kind of sprinkled throughout the bill. And so this is an opportunity for discussion about direction on how we want to handle them going forward. You can see kind of the standard language that was used at the top there, which was, presiding officer and good cause, a reasonable amount of time. The alternatives we've come up with based on the feedback from the legislature and the discussion at the last meeting would be one, to have a one blanket section in the law that talks about having, at the request of the executive director or the chair, may issue one or more extensions if good cause is shown. So just kind of a blanket, this is how we do extensions. Not in every single different section of it. Alternative 2, which was discussed, would be just extending the base period days, so there's less likelihood of a need for an extension. So that was discussed at the last meeting. And then alternative 3 is one we came up with that has a limited extension authority that says the chair can grant a 90-day extension. And then after that, the full commission would need to grant 90-day extensions and may issue one or more. So that would allow continuous extensions, but it has to go to the full commission. So the concerns from the legislature last time was that the commission would just extend things forever and there was no standard or procedural right for somebody to object to one. So we thought 3 might best address their concerns last time, and that there's, you know, an initial one that's limited to 90 days and thereafter the full commission would have to agree that it's appropriate. So those alternatives are, you could say with the initial language, or if there's those 3 alternatives, or if there's some other opinions, we can go from there.
Madam Chair, just for
Madam Chair.
clarification.
Commissioner Oscarson, let's hear from Commission Council first, and then we'll go to you.
I actually had a question.
I always defer to her.
I had a question for the executive director, because alternative 3, if you're going to have the extension go to the full commission, it would have to be in the phase of the complaint that's in the adjudicatory phase of proceedings, because otherwise it's confidential. Are you thinking they would hold a confidential session to consider it? Because we would need probably some language to do that if it was pre-panel. And then they're going to be into the facts that relate to pre-panel materials. So when you look at alternative 2 and 3, you could combine them, I think, too. That alternative 2 would just give additional time, especially in the investigation. And then alternative 3 would be at the level where is past review panel stage.
Yeah, so we certainly could combine 2 and 3. I think we would have to take a look at what confidentiality protections would be needed. I wouldn't think that the discussion about the need for a time extension would get into the meat or the, you know, the subject matter of an item. It would be similar to the jurisdictional question of, you know, does this have it? So I don't, we'd have to work out the confidential requirements about the commission granting the extra extensions.
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Oscarson. Yes, Commissioner Oscarson.
As you know, as you remember from the previous meeting, this was one of my kind of hot buttons for the for the discussion purposes. I still think 90 days is too long. I'm okay if you want to do 45 and then add another 45, but I think 90 days is too long. That's 3 months, and I think that's just and unless I'm missing something, and I know it takes staff a lot of time to do this and gather the data and those kind of things. And I think that to drag it on that long, if it's unnecessary, just because we have that time frame in place, I think that's too long. And I have some rub with that, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Duffer.
Yeah, I appreciate Commissioner Oscarson's comments on the timeframes. And I know we got kind of hammered at the last session with requesting timeframes. But once again, at that time, we were way behind the 8 ball. We had a lot of cases that we were way behind on. We had a huge inventory of backlog of cases, which is why we thought this was a good tool for staff to be able to tackle that backlog. Currently, we don't have a backlog per se, but doesn't mean we won't have one in the future. I do agree with the commissioner that 90 days just doesn't look good. It may be practical and it may be necessary to have that type of a time frame. My proposal would be we extended just 15 days to 60 days instead of 90, just because I think there's just a compromise. And I mean, once again, if this doesn't go forward if they still have issue with it, the legislature, then they can tell us that. But I think it, and I also liked the idea of combining, having a way to combine the two, alternative 2 and 3. If we do have a public meeting and the full commission is involved, we're going to have to note, as our counsel said, the case, and it may be not confidential, so we're going to have to try to figure that out. But I'm also really comfortable just having the chair with go ahead and issue not 90 days, but a 60-day extension. Actually, it'd be 15 more days, so 60 days total is what I was proposing. So basically an extra 2 weeks. So So we'll have to figure that out, but, so I know I'm rambling and I apologize, but, so I would, my wish would be 2 and 3 get combined. We don't really need the commission's full approval. I think we would go ahead and we would go up to 60 days from 45. We would also, we're looking at the advisory opinions, but I know there's other things in there that weren't there other timeframes besides advisory opinions that we were gonna push the time up to 90 days?
Yeah, if you look at the executive director's alternative 2, he captured the investigations, he moved that to 70 to 180 days. I think from what I've seen in the last few years, especially given COVID and the inability to actually get subpoenas responded to and things like that, there is an additional need for investigative time. And on advisory opinions, basically right now we're using a regulation that indicates when the requester provides supplemental information, that's when the timeline starts. And we have been able to meet those timelines even through COVID. But that being said, for example, last month it was very busy because we got 10 advisory opinions and you're issuing 10 opinions in 45 days. Very few courts even issue opinions at the level we're issuing opinions, given the
Right.
detail that's in them. So that 90 days is totally
And once
sufficient.
again,
I
we're
believe.
talking about a situation where they don't waive the time, where the individual doesn't
Right,
waive the time.
right, and
And that happens quite a bit though, but it's.
Well,
it's the
usually
cases like for the 10 that you got, how many waived their?
actually, I coordinated with most of them to either waive or they were providing supplemental information. I do have one that's still out there pending where they haven't provided supplemental information.
Yeah, so we need to give you the tool to be able to do that, but we'd have to be reasonable about the timeframes. The investigation, 70 to 180 days. I know we have one investigator and 70 days in many cases when he's got multiple cases he's working on isn't enough. I just don't think 180 days is really a good number. I'm not sure how we even came up with 180 days. I'm sure you could tell me, but I don't want to hear it. 90 days is probably, we could either extend that out to 15 more days, or we can cut it in half. But I think that I'm listening to Commissioner Oscarson, and I agree, because once again, this has to get passed through the legislature. If he's, with his experience being in the legislature and knowing that these are things that people don't like to see, and having in my prior job, I had to deal with all these types of timelines, and it's a difficult juggling act because sometimes there's certain things that can be waived and certain things that can't be waived. But once again, we're just asking for a small tool to help staff get their work done. That's what this really is. It's not, we're not doing our job. We're just giving them a tool when necessary. So I would, once again, I would combine 2 and 3. I would go for advisory opinions from 45 to 60 days. And I would say investigation would be from 70 to 90 days. That gives them additional 20 more days. I think that's fair. You could also say, let's just keep it the way it is, and then they can carve it back at the legislature. But I think if we present something very big, it's not going to be fruitful, which is what we did last time. And then as far as alternative 3, we don't really need the full commission, in my opinion. I think if we have the chairs, one more extension, and we can argue about 190-day extension. Maybe we could say another 30 days or another 60 days. I'd like to hear from my chair and from Oscarson on that. Those are my comments.
Yeah, yes.
Can I add just a thought for your discussion? Another thing that exacerbated these extensions was the pandemic. I mean, we are certainly out of the pandemic and healing from that. But at this point in time, that was very difficult for the executive director and staff, because if there wasn't a waiver of time from the subject, we were very much hamstrung on the ability to really investigate in those times, because nobody responded to phone calls. Subpoenas, like I indicated, were exceedingly slow in getting response because people had no staff, they were out. So I don't know if we want to build in like an emergency exception maybe for additional time when the governor declares an emergency at that level, because that's really the difficulty that we had. I know the governor at the time reached out and said, well, can I help with my emergency declarations to anything? But we didn't really feel his emergency declaration could just change state law. So
That's a thought.
so that is also a concern. I know it's a less concern now, given where we are, but I do want to put that on the table for your discussion.
That's something I hadn't thought about. I think that it's probably something that should apply, okay, that we should probably have something in there to allow that to happen. I too, with my fellow commissioners, I struggle with, the 90 days, the 180 days. And I know from my prior experience, when we were meeting with the legislators and stuff, and when we were asking for extensions of time, and that was their big hot button. And I will defer to my fellow Commissioner Oscarson if he thinks that not having a set time, or maybe because when they see this amount of time, and then we put in here a 90-day extension, I think that just makes it worse. I think if they don't see a number, it would be better to take alternative 2, change advisory to 60, change investigations to 90, and then have the extension authority with the chair, without number of days, because I just think that triggers something in them. So Commissioner Oscarson, can you comment on that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first thought is yes to everything you just said. When you see, it just looks like we're kicking the can down the road. And that's one of the least favorite things I have experienced in the legislature when that happens. Ross, you've seen that happen when we say, well, we'll bring this back for another hearing, we'll bring this back for another meeting. And it just, the more hearings you have to have on a bill, it becomes much more difficult to get through the session because there's so much to do in that 120 days. I think secondly, we just need to make sure on an advisory opinion, for example, what if somebody's got to vote on something? I mean, I get that. I get that we're 60 days out to do those kind of things. But if somebody's waiting for an advisory opinion to be able to vote on an issue that's really important, I guess the upside of that is they could just abstain if they don't have an advisory opinion from us. And that may or may not be the best course of action. So I realize we're limited in staff and limited in the way we do things. And again, I'm still fairly new. I can't claim honeymoon phase anymore, but I can still claim new. And I don't want to push staff to where they think that we're just trying to push them so hard that that's the case, because I think they do just an outstanding job. And I say this every meeting. But I want to make sure that we're not in a position where we're just pushing this stuff down further. I appreciate Commission Counsel's counsel on the emergency regulations and those kind of things. And I'm not thinking that may pertain to this. I think that may pertain to the whole statutory language that we have. You could add something in the end. And I suspect other commissions and boards and maybe even executive branches are doing the same thing, Mr. Armstrong. So there may be a way to put that in there. You'll have two different sides of the aisle that will agree or disagree with that, as you well know. So I think we want to stay as apolitical as we possibly can be, but timeframes are critical. Timeframes are important because that's what we work on in the legislature, and that's what they base their information on, is how we work through this process. So those would be my comments. Without exception, I agree with combining the two. And while I'm still not extremely comfortable with the amount of time the vice chair wants, I can live with that for now, and we can discuss it later. Those are my comments, Madam Chair. And I follow the example of my vice chair when I say those are my comments. I like it when he ends his statement with that.
Thank you. Commission Counsel, to address Commissioner Oscarson's point, we had an advisory opinion. This was, they waived confidentiality, and it was Justin Jones. And I recall that we did it very quickly, right? So can you comment on,
Yeah, I'd be happy to comment on that. If I have an advisory opinion come in, we connect with them, try to connect with them within a week about the advisory opinion. And I always ask if there's any time deadlines associated with it. And if they come back and say, I have a meeting tomorrow, I mean, that's going to be very difficult to get any kind of advice. And I will say, well, have your legal counsel call me, or I can send you some opinions that might help you, but I can't give you legal advice on what the commission would do. So I do try to give them some tools. But if they say it's going to be in 2 weeks, I will expedite it, even if it's a hearing, a Zoom meeting or whatever before the commission as needed, to try to get some type of direction out to them. So I don't think, it's very rare we don't meet those deadlines once I talk to the person, because it's a very active process in advisory opinions, where, basically I'm acting as your staff to connect with the advisory requests, to kind of marshal them through the process, even though we don't provide them legal advice. But we do get them to go through the process pretty well. And I think that's streamlined advisory opinions. And literally how we changed our statute is why we've been able to issue so many advisory opinions. I think we're more productive if you look at when we've changed our statutes on advisory opinions to allow them by submission. We're faster and we're more productive. And I think our opinions are more consistent as well than we were before. We did have a backlog of advisory opinions years ago. I don't remember the year, it was before I started, but we have not had any backlogs at all on our timelines on advisory opinions. I mean, if you don't want to focus on advisory opinions in this bill, I mean, it would not be, it's a wish that I think the heart of this matter is really investigations, and allowing the executive director time to get his investigations done. Advisory opinions, we have been timely on those for now 7 years, so.
Vice Chair Duffy?
Just re-looking at the language that was provided to us and listening to everybody here today, I have a suggestion to simplify all of this. My suggestion would be that we would have language that would read, upon the request of the executive director, the chair may issue one extension of procedural time limits in this chapter for good cause shown, period. So every case is different. Every advisory opinion is different. Every situation is different. So by putting timeframes down from 70 to 180 days or from 45 to 90 days, that's kind of putting everything in a box. But what I just said gives the opportunity for the chair, upon the request of the executive director, one time an extension, and that extension, the extension is whatever the extension is, because everything is case dependent. And it's simple. And if it gets abused, the chair will not approve it.
Yeah.
I have complete faith in this chair and any chair that would be sitting in this position. And I feel that I also have faith in our staff that we're not going to abuse that. Because once again, it has to go through the executive director, first of all, and he may or may not be, he or she may or may not be embarrassed to even ask for that. But if it's necessary, once again, it's a tool. And the chair would have to review that. And if you want to add a second or a third tier, you could have the vice chair, approve it as well. But I don't think that's necessary. So that's just, I'm throwing that out as a way to just make it simple and also make it kind of compact. So at least we have one tool, one extension, and the terms can be whatever everybody agrees to for that one particular case.
Yeah, so this Executive Director Armstrong, the dates selected in alternative 2 assumed no extension authority whatsoever would ever be allowed. And so, although it's interesting to combine 2 with an extension authority, I think you don't want to. I would say if you're going to have an extension authority, keep the timeframes that are there now, because then you don't have to talk about why 70 to whatever days. You just have that extension authority. And I think the limit of 1 extension would address the legislature's concerns from last session. And And in reality, the vast majority of subjects waive. And so I think we explained that or tried to explain that at the last session. I don't know if it sunk in that this is a rare occurrence anyway, but I think it makes sense to not mess with the days if you're going to maintain an extension authority, because then you don't have to have that discussion.
Yeah, after hearing the discussion, I agree with that because like I said, when they see numbers of days, it just puts a stop sign up and asks too many questions. So if there's one extension, then they're not going to say, oh, well, then it gets extended all the time. It's just one extension. And I think that's more reasonable.
And I want to comment, Madam Chair, Tracy Chase for the Record Commission Council. As to Vice Chair Dufferin's example, anytime you are unable to perform your duties, the Vice Chair is available to do those. So if you were out of town or on vacation and you weren't able to review the matter, we already have authority. It would roll to the Vice Chair. So there would not be ever someone not able to accommodate the request.
Okay. So I sense from my fellow commissioners that we just want to do alternative 1 and the language that Vice Chair Dufferin put in there.
Yeah, so just for the record, I actually read through, it was alternative 3 that I used. I'm sorry, I guess it's the same language as an alternative 1, but for the record, I'll reread what I proposed as a motion. That would be, once again, upon the request of the executive director, the chair may issue 1 extension of procedural time limits in this chapter for good cause shown, period. That would be my motion, that we would move that forward in our bill. That's it.
You don't have to second it.
I don't even know if we need a motion.
No,
but
no.
That would be what I would recommend based on our conversation here.
Okay. Mr. Oscarson, agreed?
Yeah, I'm still not overjoyed with it, but okay.
Well, I think just having 1 extension is much more palatable to the legislature than multiple extensions,
Agreed, totally. I totally agree with that.
and not
I
having
just,
a date time, not having a set date. Number of
I
days.
just, yeah, okay. And Council Chase's explanation that when somebody calls with some type of, a more urgent request, that she's able to respond to that gives me some better understanding of how that process works. And I know our staff always bends over backwards. And I just want to make sure that, for the record, this is not any kind of accusation or discussion about the quality of the work and the amount of work and the type of work our staff does. It's just a question of, when we've got this bill, these are the little things that bog you down in a legislative session. They're the little things that sidestep the whole bill, and it ends up going in a whole different direction.
Mhm.
So it needs to be as concise, but as, like we were talking about some of the other reasons for these things, it needs to be as concise, but be able to catch where we feel we need to be. And I think that was my comment in the previous meeting. This can't be a 60-page bill. It just can't, or we'll end up in the same boat we were in before. So we've got to make sure that's true. But I support the discussion for sure, and really appreciate the input from council and the executive director, and defer to you, who all have been on the committee longer. You understand the challenges that come forward where I may not quite yet as much as I should. So I support the discussion and the decision that was made.
Thank you. Right, so staff, you have your direction on this
Yeah.
item?
That's pretty clear. The next item is on page 45 at the top. And it's just an additional clarification of the means we have to investigate that includes, records requests, subpoenas, and other legal methods. And then the next one, and then based on the discussion that we just had, I'm going to actually make a totally different recommendation, I think, and I take a look at. So section 44 on that same page on 45, at the last meeting, we said, there was a recommendation to change that 15 to 60 or 45, and you want to go back down to 30.
Yeah.
And be interested to get commission council's thoughts too. But I think because there's a change from provides to presents, I actually think the 15 is probably, we just keep it at 15. But I don't know if there's more information about, because in my thought, that our struggle is if we have a panel, we always send it to you 1 week before the panel. And I was thinking, if you go to 30 days, then I can get that panel information to you more than 1 week before. But the time frame of when the decision had to be made used to be tethered to when I sent the email. This language changes it to when it's actually presented to the panel for a recommendation. And so I think the 15 days is actually probably, we just keep it at 15 and don't even touch that time frame. But I don't know if the commission council has other reasons why there was that suggested change last time.
No, I think part of the suggested change was that when you look at the commission meetings, regular meeting dates, that it's just dependent on, if it comes out of the review panel, you only have a limited amount of time without a waiver to get it for the commission in an adjudicatory hearing, which is
That's
60 days. So that's where sometimes the rub was, and for example, I'll give you a good example, was a case we did in the fall for Miss Weber. The commission's regular meeting date was 1 day after the time expiration. So, and they were unwilling to waive the beginning. But that being said, I said, fine, if you're unwilling to waive, I will call the commission for a special meeting, and then we will go ahead and proceed through. And then they said, well, okay, then we'll waive. But I mean, for 1 day, it's just the timing of that. So sometimes it's the timing of when the review panel issues its determination and the scheduling of the monthly commission meetings. And those have become even tighter now that, for space, if we're having them in person, especially if it's an adjudicatory hearing. Zoom meetings are certainly much easier. But that was really one reason, but I don't think there's an issue with the 15 days. But it may just call for special meetings of the commission itself. So that's why it was moved to 30 days, was just to meet the full commission's hearing schedule, which is the third Wednesday of the month.
I think keeping it at 15 would be better, just because, again, it's changing number of days that just gives them heartburn, so. And, now that we can meet virtually, we can call special meetings. It's not like in the old days where it was rather hard to go and have special meetings.
Right.
It's true.
So basically that was the concern. But I don't think it is something that necessarily, as you indicated, it's fine if it's not in the legislation because we can accommodate it in other ways.
Can make that.
Madam
change.
Chair.
Yes, Commissioner Austin.
So, sorry, Ross, I just need to interject one thing. I think Commission Council Chase's and the chair's thought process about we can have these meetings by Zoom or however we need to have them, post them in 3 days, those kind of things that we need to have is absolutely accurate. And I think if anything, if one of the lessons we learned from the pandemic was that we can effectively continue to hold meetings in those with that criteria. While we want to be in person as much as we possibly can, I think that allows us some leeway and some flexibility to do what we need to do rather than gather everybody together in one room. So I respect and appreciate that input, and I think it should be considered. And it's probably going to be considered across the board by all commissions and boards.
Thank you. The next green change is on page 53, section 53. And section 2, it's just a clarification that the commission can resolve an issue by any method available in the chapter, including stipulation, consent order, agreed settlement, or deferred agreement. So just a extra clarification of the commission's ability to resolve the case. And that concludes the changes and discussion points following the last meeting.
Right? Any other comments? If you've read through the full draft?
Madam Chair, I had one final comment. I always say final, and I have like 5 more after that, so I apologize, but just harping back on this whole time frame concern. And I hear Commissioner Oscarson loud and clear about, that we need to be super careful with timeframes and because it could be problematic for our bill. I really agree with that too. So, with the language that I had proposed earlier about making it simple and having one extension and then the terminology, for good cause shown. So, maybe staff can maybe work with the good cause shown and like maybe dial it down even more, like for emergency situations, like kind of how our council said, when we're in a pandemic or, I don't really want to say it's when it's a pandemic or when the governor says we're in an emergency situation, but just maybe look at the language for good cause shown. Because I mean, that could be, an infinite amount of things I could come up with good cause shown. But we don't want to abuse it. We want to use it as it needs to read as though it's an exception, a huge exception. So it very rarely would have to happen. And I'm not sure how we would word that, but I think that's what the concern is, that we're going to all of a sudden now have these requests for good cause shown all the time, just because, hey, I didn't wake up this morning and I didn't read my email. I was out late last night and I didn't want to do the work, so I need an extra day. I'm not talking about staff. I'm talking about me, the individual that needs to provide us information. I mean, we just don't want it to be abused if we go down that path. So I really respect what he's saying and hearing what he's asking, Mr. Oscarson. But I think, once again, I think it's a good tool that we have. We just need to make sure that we don't abuse it if we get it, and that it's only used for, emergency situations or when it's really, really necessary. Because we have been able to survive without it. But it is something that I think once again, another tool in our toolbox that would be helpful to staff. All right, I think I beat that horse to death. Thank you.
Well, Madam Chair, may I, since he made a comment, I'm going to make my additional. I agree with him 100%. But the bottom line is, as the vice chair alluded to in much of his conversation, his comments, perception is reality when you're in the legislature trying to pass a bill. So when they see timeframes and dates and those kind of things, that's where people start to get hung up on things. I did anyway. Now, I can't speak for the legislature today or tomorrow or next year. I can only speak from what my experience was on the IFC and on the money committees and those kind of things, and the health. So I agree and I concur, and I just want to make sure that we're not throwing up any roadblocks. We want to get this through this time. We want to do it the right way. We want to get it signed by the governor and get the things we need, tools we need, as the vice chair so eloquently describes, a toolbox and toolkit that our staff, who does amazing anyway, will continue to be able to have those tools to do the job they need to do. Those would be my comments, Madam Chair.
Yeah, I think, if you put in there emergency situation, well, that would blow it out of the water. I mean,
Right.
I think, good cause is, and what we could do for the legislature, just kind of update them and say, we only asked for one extension this year, or something like that. And, kind of give them some comfort.
We only needed one.
Yeah. We only needed one this year.
Or we could have used 3, but we they had to have special meetings because, and then which costs taxpayers dollars. And so here's a cost benefit analysis. This will save the state money because we could just had a simple approval for an extension of 2 weeks. We didn't have to have a special meeting.
Right.
So, but once again, those are the scenarios that we have to come up with, like we had it on the
Well,
earlier.
in the presentation to say, you know, we had a situation where we had the 15-day time frame and our meeting was scheduled for the next day. So, you know, so.
Yeah, I think just like with
Well,
the abuse of power provision, we'll come with examples and that will be helpful.
Yes.
Yeah. Commissioner Oscarson.
I lost my train of thought, Madam Chair. The executive director completely blew my thought out of the water. I can't even remember what I was gonna say. Not enough
Well,
coffee.
that means you were listening to what he was saying.
I was razor focused on his comments.
Okay. You said you had like 4 other comments.
Well, I
Or
mean, the
5.
executive director, which is why we hired him, because he's intelligent, he just cut to the chase and he answered my other concerns and just, I mean, I'm looking at lawinsider.com, good cause shown definition, you can use that or whatever, just, we have Darcy sitting here listening to this, so she can just help out with the language, but doing research on what good cause shown should be, but once again, just dial down, just give us more definition, and maybe it's not even necessary after you do the exercise, but those are my 5 additional things. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I did remember what I was going to say.
All right.
Thanks to the words of my colleague. I'm wondering, Ross, if maybe in the discussion with LCB, again, maybe other boards and commissions are doing similar emergency language of some kind. That may resolve this whole thing by just adding that in, because if the legislature starts to see that as a common theme and a commonality in some of these discussions and some of these bills that come forward, it will be a very easy add in as a B or a C on one of these things.
That makes sense to take a look at for sure.
Okay. And I don't have any further comments. I guess we will need to have one more meeting just to look at the final stuff before we send it to the full commission, or
We can,
we'll just do it by Zoom, make it simple, because it'll be simple.
yeah, if we
Just-
want to come back with
Yeah, so we can approve it with,
before it goes to the full commission, yeah, we can take a look at.
yeah.
Calendar would be the key on that one.
So like, you guys be ready like next week or something, or?
We need some posting time is all for scheduling.
And my fellow commissioners?
Can I throw this out as a thought?
Sure.
Maybe we can have a meeting on the day of our regular meeting, like right before. We can schedule our regular meeting for maybe like 10, and then we can meet at 9 or something and just do it then. Or do you need more time than that?
Well, my thought would be is what if we get it from them and we're like going, oh, we can't submit it to the commission now and we have to get it out to the legislature then. That's my only concern. I mean, I have full confidence in staff that we probably won't have any changes, but I don't want to be scrambling. So, I mean, we could do it that week of the 16th. You know, we could do it on the 16th, but then again, if we have changes, then they're going to be scrambling, and then we have to have that document posted to, well, I guess we could do amendments then.
You can have it anytime before the commission meeting, because if we would be nice to have a little bit of time to restructure if there's any language changes. So if you want to do it earlier in that week, the open meeting law only requires it go to the public at the same time we provide it to the commission.
Okay.
So since it would be something late materials, we would post it as soon as we provided it to the commission,
Okay.
which could be Monday then, if you wanted to do that meeting on Monday, or if,
I
Okay,
can do the 12th or the 11th of May.
and let's see. I can do either one of those days.
So if we do the 12th, that gives them an additional day.
Mm-hmm, yeah. Commissioner Oscarson, can you do the 12th?
I'm good with
Okay.
that.
Okay. 9 o'clock?
If it's a Zoom, 9 o'clock works wonderful.
Yeah, okay. All right, so our next meeting will be May 12th at 9 o'clock via Zoom. Okay. All right. Next item, Yo,
Madam
yes.
Chair, before we move from this item, it would be good to have a motion
Yeah, Mm-hmm.
to, that we provide you another draft, including all the comments that were under discussion today and direction given.
yes. Do I have a motion
So
to
moved,
that?
so moved. I ditto the council's comments.
All right, is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, motion carries. Item 5, commissioner comments. You have any comments, further comments, or you want to identify a future agenda item?
I have two comments. One is it's Employee Appreciation Week, my understanding, and just wanted to thank our staff again for a great job that they do. And may the 4th be with you.
Oh, gosh.
I just like to ask a question. Has Vice Chair Duffer never thought about a career in politics? Because he's really good at it.
The answer is no, and I detest politics, but thank you for the thought.
I don't have any comments. Well, I just want to say, I really appreciate all of the hard work that staff has done on this BDR draft. You've done a lot of great work on it, and Executive Director Pedrosa's minutes were great, how she captured everything. And I really appreciate how you presented it to us, so we weren't like getting down into the weeds, and we could really concentrate on the high level, super important items. So thank you for putting it together that way. Thought process. Right. Now, Executive Director Armstrong, do we have any members of the public present?
There are no members of the public present.
And do we have any members of the public on Zoom?
There are no members of the public on Zoom.
All right, thank you. All right, at this time, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
All right,
I'll be happy to second that motion, Madam Chair.
all right, thank you. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. All right, thank you all. Thank you, fellow commissioners.
Thank you.
We'll see you on the 12th. And I hope you get to make it up here for our meeting on the 18th.
I hope so too, but I will unfortunately make no promises at this point.
Well, I hope everything's going well with your mom. It's getting better.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your thoughts and your kind words.
All right, thank you. Bye.